Hello and welcome to this video overview of Blender 2.57 from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and as of today, as many of you probably already know, but some of you may not, Blender 2.57, which is the first official non-beta 2.5 release, was released today as of April 13th. And so there's a lot of changes in this from the previous 2.56 version, and I'm going to try and take you through most of those changes, although I'm sure I'll miss a few here and there. There have been many bug fixes from the developers, quite a few new features, some things that have been re-added from the 2.49 days that people have been asking for, along with just a bunch of new features as well. So I'm going to just go down the list and start with the interface. The main thing with the interface that has changed, that I know a lot of people have really been calling for, is the old way of splitting your viewport. In all versions of 2.5 up until now, you would split the viewport or any other window by using the handle at the top right or bottom left of each view by just left click and dragging in the direction that you wish to split it. And you could split this very easily. Well, in 2.49, the way this was done was by right clicking on this header, which if I right click, you can see has been brought back. So now, if we just right click on here, I can say join area, which one I can then choose which one that I want. In this case, I'll just merge those down. Or I could go over here, right click, split area, and then just choose the area that I want anywhere in here. And let's just say maybe I want to split this one, and there we go. Now you can still merge in the same way or the new way, or actually I guess it should be the new way and the old way. So a lot of people will probably be happy to see this. A lot of people find it a bit more intuitive. So that's that. The old window splitting method has been brought back. Next, one other thing from the 2.49 days that a lot of people missed was when working with transforms, if you needed to do very small precision movements, a mouse was sometimes just not appropriate for that. And we've got under the properties panel, we've got the sliders up here that you can hold down shift and just very slowly move it along. Well, it would be even better if we could do that with the mouse cursor or with the arrow keys. So now if, let's say for example, I hit G and just move my mouse cursor or my arrow key up, it'll move up, left, right, down. And so you can do this with, it looks like any one of them, whether that's grabbing, rotating, scaling, you name it. So now you're able to manipulate your transforms using the arrow keys again. So this is very good for those of you that really need small precision transforms. Next, that's about it for the modeling tools, although I've got some other ones that I'm going to talk about here in a moment, but those are more part of an add-on. So let's now go ahead and go over to the modifiers. We don't have any new modifiers, at least not that I specifically remember. I may have missed one or two in here. But we do have a couple changes to two of the most commonly used modifiers. The first is the mirror modifier. If we go in here, and let's first just make our mesh appropriate. So here I have my cube on the right side of the y-axis. If I go in, add a mirror modifier, all it's fine and dandy, but we have this new option called merge, and this will actually merge vertices within the merge threshold, and you can see the threshold here. By default, this is 0.001, so that's 0.001 of one Blender unit. So if I were to say just take this up to 1, you can see that those have merged, and you'll notice too that it's merging with the original mesh such that your original mesh isn't distorted, but the mirrored side is. And so a very cool feature that can really come in handy to help prevent some kinds of seams or ripping apart, along with the clipping option. Next, we have the solidify modifier that's new, or that's been changed. And the solidify modifier is really great for adding thickness to something. Say, for example, if I were to remove this top face, I can very easily, with the solidify modifier, create a box of sorts. And using this, maybe I would go in, set even thickness, high quality normals, and there we go, I have an even box. But what you weren't able to do up until now was assign a different material to each one of these surfaces. But now you can, using the material index offset. So just to show this real quick, let me just add in 3 separate materials. And this one, we'll just click new, we'll take this over to a blue, and maybe we'll add in one more, and make this one a red. Okay, so we've got 3 material slots in here. Go back to material, or to the modifier, and if I say take the offset material index of the generated faces up, like this, Oh, there we go. Okay. Seems that you have to leave edit. You can't see it in edit mode, but if we leave edit mode, then you can see it. So you can see as I change this, it changes the interior faces, or this one will change the rim, and so now you can have up to 3 materials on your single solidify mesh without ever having to actually apply that to make the mesh real and thus apply the materials. Moving on, going to the UV image editor, I'm just going to split my view here, make use of my model at the same time, change this over to the UV image editor. There we are. And let's just first go ahead and let's select everything. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and apply this. But then let's select everything and maybe hit U and just Smart UV Project. Okay, there we go. And now let's say maybe I want to save this face layout. So I'll go to UVs and export UV face layout. At which point I will just save this, say, on my desktop. And we've got a new option down here for the fill opacity. And what this allows you to do is it'll actually fill the faces rather than just giving you a wireframe. So if I set this to, say, cube underscore UVs and leave the opacity at 25%, export that UV layout, and then I could go ahead and open this and go to the desktop, and we'll find it right there. You'll notice that it has actually filled each one of the faces here with the color of the material that was assigned to it. So this gives you a much easier way to keep track of which face is which in the UV layout once you export it. This is particularly true if you were to then take that UV layout into Photoshop to do some custom painting, whatever it may be. This is much more ideal than the original method of just using the wireframe. Now, I believe you can set that to 0 and just use the wireframe, but this is a nice alternative. The other option that's new in the UV image editor is the ability for live unwrapping. And this in particular pertains to when using seams. So first, if I'm going to use seams on my mesh to control the unwrapping, first I'm going to use the unwrapping method here, just the default one. So I'll just hit U and unwrap. And actually first let me just clear this out, and I'm going to remove that. And now I'll just hit U and unwrap. And currently you'll notice that nothing really happens. Well, let's go ahead and just set some seams in here. And in this case, I'm just going to select everything, and I'm going to hit Control E and mark seams just to make it nice and quick. And then I can hit U and unwrap again, and you'll see that it's unwrapped based on the seams. Well, as many of you know, if you're unwrapping a complicated model, you'll commonly find yourself tweaking the seams a lot and thus unwrapping a lot. Well, it's not very ideal to, add a seam, unwrap, add a seam, unwrap. So instead, if you open the toolbar by hitting T and scroll all the way down, you'll find a new option called Live Unwrap right here. And what this does is if I just edit a seam, so let's say if I select this, hit Control E and clear seam and select everything, it's automatically adjusted the unwrap to fit. And actually, if I go in here and enable the, there we go, keep those in sync, this way these will show regardless of whether this is selected. I could maybe select these, Control E, clear seam, and you'll notice it's immediately updated to match the new seams without ever having to unwrap again. Okay, so those are the new UV mapping features, or UV unwrapping in the image editor and whatnot. So going back to just the 3D view, let's switch back over to the materials panel. And we've got 2 changes. The main one is, some of you may have noticed this when I was adding the solidify modifier. In 2.56, and I know it's changed a little bit between versions, but if I were to, let me just remove these real quick. In 2.56 and such, if I were to add a new material, it would have automatically duplicated this material. So in effect, it would have done this. Or actually, no, it wouldn't have done that. It would have just done this. And so it would duplicate that material, or else create a new single user of it, such that if I added a lot of new slots to something, I would be left with multiple copies of the same material. And this was very frustrating, if you wanted to consistently base it off a different material. So like if I wanted to add a new slot, then base it off of this one, I would have already duplicated this one and be left with, again, a lot of different materials that I would then have to manually remove. Well, now when you add a new slot, it's added as empty, and you can just choose the material that you wish to use. So much more ideal than the previous version. And again, in the previous version, it may not have been that way in 2.56, but it was that way in the SVN version for quite some time. The other setting has to do with using the node materials. So if I enable the node materials, you'll now notice that I now have the render pipeline options, and all the other settings have been removed basically. This is because, previously you would set a node material and then you would still be able to edit everything in here. Well, now you have just the material pipeline options, but then if you go into the node editor, let's just say bring in the node editor here, go to material nodes, and let's say I've got this material, click new, then I can see the settings in here. Shift D, maybe add in a new material. Maybe I'll change this color, something like that. And if I select that, then this one loads in. But if you don't have any of them selected, which I can't actually unselect anything in here, or maybe you can, it doesn't actually show any of the other settings that you need. And the pipeline options here, rather than being based on a single material like it previously was, is now pertaining strictly to the entire node layout. So this helps keeps things a little bit more consistent and such that you're not mixing one material that only allows or has no shadows, one that has transparent shadows, and this way everything's just nice and consistent. Okay, that's about it for the materials. So let's jump over to the textures. I'm going to disable that real quick and we'll get rid of that. But jumping over to the textures, there's been one major change. Well, actually, it's a pretty small change, but major as far as usability, in that now you no longer have to, if you wanted to go and add a world texture, you no longer have to go first to the world and then the texture to set the type of texture you're adding. From the texture panel, you can simply click, oh, I want a material texture, a world texture, or a brush texture. So this is huge for those people that, particularly new users that were not familiar with the way that Blender used to work, even all the way from the I remember it working this way in 2.24 or 2.27, I think it was. And so it's been that way for a long time, where you had to first go to the type of texture you wanted and then switch to the texture panel in order to get the right context. Luckily, you no longer have to do that. The other thing with the textures that's been added is improved bump mapping. Some of you may remember that one of the big Blender 2.5 features was improved bump mapping types, or one type, and the rendering method, which in fact if we go to the release logs here, we can actually see it, and scroll all the way down in this image. This was the 2.49 bump mapping, this was the 2.5. Well, now in 2.57 we have even more options, and this is the original type of bump, the compatible, the default, or best quality to get the bump mapping that's appropriate for you. And as far as the settings in Blender is concerned, if we just go in here, add a new cloud texture, and maybe we'll set this to both, go down, turn off the color, enable the geometry, we can see the bump mapping in here, but now we also have an option or two to change the bump mapping method from compatible, original, default, or best quality. And in some of these, you'll see we've got texture space, object space, and view space. And for these, I recommend you just go ahead and read the settings right in here to kind of learn a little bit more about those. So in 2.57, again, we have even further improved bump mapping code. Next up is the material and physics panel. We've got some reorganization here. In 2.56, some of you may remember, this was a series of individual fields. And in fact, let me just jump over to 2.56 real quick here. If I pull this out, get a little bit bigger view, go over to the physics panel, you'll notice that we have cloth, force fields, collision, all these kind of things that really were not very well organized as far as understanding what pertained to what. Well, now in 2.57, we just have enable physics for a soft body or a fluid, and we can then disable these at render time or in the viewport. We can just remove them, so much easier to work with as far as organization and understanding what's what's enabled, and so on. The next thing is in the particles, along with kind of physics, and that is the SPH particles. Now, I can't go into a lot of detail on these, but these are the, if you go to the physics settings in the particles, these are the fluid, and allow you to actually have fluid or particle-based fluid simulations that are very, very cool. There's a lot of things you can do with them, and in 2.57, I encourage you to just kind of explore these. I believe it was Allegorith, I believe is his name. Apologies if I don't remember his real name, but he did some coverage on the changes that he made on these, and these again, he just refactored a lot of the settings, reorganized them, and made it a little bit easier to understand. In fact, if I just go to 2.57 here, or excuse me, 2.56, we can go down to the fluid particles, and we can see how they look here and how they look here. So they've just been reorganized. You can see each one of these settings now have checkboxes, so we can disable the repulsion, the interaction, the rest length, etc. You know, just a little bit more organized and a little easier to understand what exactly is going on with those. Next, we've got a new tool that pertains to rigging. And go back here to 2.7. I'm going to just delete the cube here that I added. And real quick, let's just go ahead and add in an armature bone. And this is the propagate pose tool. Now, I'm not positive exactly how to use it, but I encourage you to check it out. I just simply haven't explored it well enough. But if I were to, say, go in and we can find the propagate pose tool, right? It's in here somewhere. I think maybe it's in the toolbar. But if I say insert a keyframe, we'll just do rotation. I'll go up, say 10 keyframes, and insert, or 20, maybe rotate it. Insert a rotation. Go back to the beginning. Insert rotation. You can then go in, and I believe it's under pose, and you have, let's see. And you have the propagate pose tool, which the propagate pose basically allows you to, again, as the tooltip says, copy selected aspects of the current pose to subsequent poses already keyframed. Again, not real familiar with how to use it just because I don't do a lot of rigging and whatnot, but go check it out. There is on the code.blender.org, I believe, there is an excellent breakdown of exactly how this tool works. But those of you that are animators or riggers are probably already familiar with this and are probably laughing at my very poor description of what it does, because honestly, don't really know. But again, a new tool to play with. Moving on to the compositor, there's a couple of things that are very, very cool. Let me first just real quick go back to object mode, and I'm just going to give us a basic monkey to render here. Go in, add in a subsurf modifier, do all this, set it to smooth, and then we've got a basic light over here. We'll just change this over to a area light and do this, take this down to 5 and 10, and then I will render this. Okay. There we go. So I can render that. So now I just have a very simple, poor render to go in and look at the compositing options. So if I go into the compositor, right in the node editor here, switch over to compositing nodes and click use nodes. One of the first things you'll find is oftentimes people work with the backdrop option right here. And one of the things that's been very difficult in the past is if your node lines here were going over the backdrop, it was nearly impossible to see them because they were solid black. Well, now you'll notice that they change color based on the backdrop behind them, so you can see it really well. Let's see. There we go. Scale that down a little bit. So now you can actually follow your node lines anywhere they're going, even across the backdrop, whereas before it was very easy to completely lose track and you just had to enable or disable the backdrop. Along with the backdrop, we also have the options now to view the backdrop with its alpha or with the alpha transparency channel. And so that allows us to kind of, control it a little bit more. Then we have one more option called auto render, and the auto render enables us to re-render and composite change layers based on the 3D edit. So if you're using something as a mask, let's say just a cube, and you edit that, then it will automatically pick that up and re-render that render layer to detect the changes. And that way you don't have to make changes, render, make changes, render. It'll just automatically detect and render it for you. The other thing that's really cool and that's very improved are the node groups. Many of you may be familiar with the node groups in 2.56 and back and know that they were absolutely terrible. You basically had no control whatsoever over them. Well, now we do. And let's just say, for example, I have this very, very simple, basic change here on the nodes. maybe I'll just go in here, increase this curve, maybe decrease the brightness a little, and increase the contrast. So whatever my changes may have been, I can now take this and press Control G, and that will add a node group, just as before. But new in this node group is if I hit Tab to open that group, you'll now notice that I have, let me just move these down so that we can see things. Here we go. I now have the ability to name the group, so I can say this is my group. And you'll notice that I have sockets both on the left and the right side based on the inputs that I'm using here. Well, the cool thing is that I can create any number of sockets that I want. So let's say that the final output of this image is, increased contrast. Well, let's just drag a handle over here. It adds a new one, and we'll just say this is contrast. Or maybe this one here, I'll just hit the X, remove that, and this could be anything. Maybe I'll grab this over, and this will just be color change. Whatever it may be, I can add or rename these any way that I want. I can reorganize them, and the cool part then is if I hit Tab and close this down, I then have them named here. So I can just say, without ever moving this, oh, well, this is my contrast input. This is the color change one, and there we are. So you can add basically as many of these as you want. You notice if I just take these over, it just keeps adding new ones, and it's based on, it grabs the dot based on the type of input or output that you're using, so it's easy to tell what type of input or socket it is. Very, very cool one. Yet again, you notice too, I can also grab different node groups here. So if I say duplicate, or actually I guess I can't do that, but if I were to, let's just hit Tab, let's duplicate this group, let's go in here, we'll delete this, and now I have two groups in here. Oops, first make it a single user. Okay, so there we go. Now I have two separate groups, and I can go in, change these at any time to then, just like any other type of group, to affect what's inside of it. Okay, moving on. Next, we've got some changes in the user preferences. Go back to the 3D view here. Let's remove this again. And the first change that actually the only change that I want to look at is a new theme option. And if we go over to our themes, you'll notice that we have a new addition here if you were to compare this, and that is the bone color sets. So first, before I show these, let's go ahead and look at what bone color sets are. And that is if we go in, let's just add an armature real quick. It can be anything. And let's go over to hit Control Tab, go into pose mode, select the bone, add a new bone group, and click Assign. Now we have the default color settings here, and we can choose any one of these to then determine what these are. So you can have a different color set based on the type of your bone. So, maybe you've got a deforming rig or a control rig, or you want to name all the IK bones a certain color, or all the deforming bones. So you can now assign groups on those, and you can go in and customize those colors any way that you want to, make them distinct for you. And lastly, in 2.57, we have a series of new add-ons and changes to the add-ons. So first, in the add-ons tab, you'll notice that there's now icons next to it, and these icons represent whether it is a official icon or official add-on or a community one. And so the ones with the small person are community level, and in fact I can just toggle this off. You'll notice now they've all changed to the Blender icon to note that they are officially supported. And also, we now have all of our import and export options have been added as add-ons versus just options in here. And so now, if you don't want to ever use motion capture, you can just go back to your add-ons and disable motion capture right here. Next, the network render has been moved to an add-on as well. So if we go to render and choose community, you'll find that network render, which traditionally was available right here, has now been moved to an add-on. So, if you don't ever use that, you can enable or disable it very easily. And also, we've got another major add-on that's been included with 2.57, and that is the Loop Tools add-on. Many of you will be familiar with this, developed by Bart Crouch. Very cool modeling set that if I enable this, close these, let's go ahead and leave pose mode, delete this, I'll just go in, add in a plane, hit tab to go into edit mode, hit W, subdivide a couple of times. First thing you'll notice is that if I hit W, I have my loop tools. And a couple of these in particular, which are the two that I'm going to demo, are the bridge and the loft that many people are familiar with and many people have always been asking for. Let's say if I duplicate this up, and then I want to merge these or fill these faces. Traditionally I would go in, select 4 vertices, hit F, fill a face. Well, now I can just select, say, these edges, and I'll hit W, loop tools, and bridge. And there we go. Now I've got these settings over here. I can increase the number of segments. I can change whether that is linear or cubic, so if it's curved or straight. I can remove any faces that may have been between them. I can set the, just segments with an edge smaller than this are merged. Then there's also the hide strength results in more fluid curves. Not specifically sure what that is. We can also set a twist option, so you'll notice that now these are twisted through, and this definitely has its uses from time to time. You probably won't use it all too often, but it's there if you need to. You can also then reverse that. Next is a really cool one, and that is the lofting. So let's say, for example, I go in here and I'll just remove these vertices, and I'll select this, and I'm just going to Shift D to duplicate this up. Basically I can create a profile of anything that I want going through here. Maybe I'll hit W and smooth this a few times, and there we go. Actually, you know what? I'll go ahead and select this, and I'll smooth it a few times as well. So now I have this profile of 5 mesh circles that make up a shape that I want, whatever it may be. I can now just hit W, loop tools, and loft, and it will merge or blend the faces in between them. Now you'll notice that the twist option here definitely needs some tweaking, and you can see that it tends to get a little bit messy at times. And if this happens and you're finding that you just can't get a right result, you may need to do it in, say, 2 steps. So in this case, maybe I will undo this and I will just grab these 3. I'll hit W, loft, and there we go. Then I can select these, hit W and loft, and there we go. So much faster than merging all those one by one. And obviously this is a very simple example. You could extrude this far faster than I could have just done it with the lofting tool, but you can see how that can have a very cool effect. Then we've also got the curve, circle, flatten, relax, and space options, which I won't go into today, but I encourage you to play with. And lastly, I'll also just say that we've also got the loop tools right down here, where if I want to, say, use the exact same bridge settings each time, well, I can just toggle this down, set my settings any way that I want, and then just click bridge. So there you have it. Those are most of the changes in 2.57. Obviously, there are also a huge number of bug fixes. It's much faster, it's smoother, it's far more stable, and overall, huge leap ahead from the previous 2.56 version. So I encourage you to check it out and enjoy.